Welcome to The Explainer. Let's jump right into it today because we are exploring something absolutely fascinating. We're looking at the very heart of the Quran, a chapter known as Al-Fātiḥah. But, as we'll see while unpacking the source material, this isn't just some simple prayer you passively read out of a book. It's actually structured as a dynamic, two-way conversation between the believer and God. And to understand just how central this text is, look at this number 17. That is the bare minimum number of times practicing Muslims recite this short 7-verse chapter every single day during their 5 daily prayers. Because of this constant daily repetition, it's widely considered to be the most frequently recited chapter in the entire world. Pretty incredible, right? So the name of the chapter is Al-Fātiḥah, which translates directly to the opening. It's the very first chapter of the Quran, and it essentially acts as a masterful summary of the text's entire central message. Today, we're going to look closely at these everyday words and unpack the really deep spiritual framework hidden inside them. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our agenda for today. Recognizing mercy and care, perfect justice, the turning point, seeking the straight path, and finally, shared themes across faiths. Section 1, Recognizing Mercy and Care in verses 1 and 2. The very first verse begins, "In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful." Right off the bat, it roots the relationship between God and humanity in mercy, not punishment. And the source material uses this brilliant metaphor to explain the two distinct Arabic words for mercy used here. On the left, we have Ar-Rahman, which is God's universal, unlimited mercy for all creation. Think of it like sunlight that falls on absolutely everyone, good and bad alike. Then on the right is Ar-Rahim, a special mercy for those who actively seek him. It's like a person who actually opens their window to let the sunlight in and enjoy the warmth inside their home. What's really wonderful to note here is how the biblical book of Psalms and Lamentations, too, shares this exact priority, beginning humanity's relationship with God through that same lens of mercy. Moving on, verse 2 says, "All praise belongs to God, Lord of all worlds." But the Arabic word for Lord here, Rab, carries so much more weight. It literally means creator, sustainer, provider, teacher, protector, and the one who nurtures growth. Think of a gardener. A gardener doesn't just toss seeds in the dirt and walk away, right? A true gardener actively waters the seeds, removes the weeds, protects those fragile little shoots, and patiently nurtures them into maturity. That is the level of care being described here. And honestly, it closely parallels the biblical concept of God, where Jesus teaches his followers to pray to our Father, portraying God not just as a distant creator, but as someone who continually and actively cares for his creation. Then, in verse 3, the text deliberately repeats those names of mercy, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Now, you might be wondering, why repeat it right away? Well, because the very next verse discusses judgment. The text is making a really clear structural point that mercy always precedes justice. It's just like a loving parent who corrects a child but never stops loving them. God is perfectly just while remaining infinitely merciful. We actually see the same profound repetition in the Bible in Exodus 34:6, where God is described as compassionate, gracious, and abounding in love. Which brings us to section 2, perfect justice and accountability. In verse 4, we transition to the concept of judgment, and it explains that human history isn't just some random sequence of events. It actually has a destination. It reads, "Master of the Day of Judgment." Now, while the idea of judgment can definitely sound intimidating, the source explains how this verse actually offers profound comfort. Imagine someone who escapes punishment their entire life because human courts fail or people just forget. This verse is the ultimate promise that God doesn't forget. It guarantees that every hidden deed, every unseen kindness, and every injustice ultimately matters. Perfect justice will finally exist. This is a core theological message shared deeply in the Bible as well, where Jesus and Paul both emphasize that history moves toward ultimate accountability before God. Section 3, the turning point, where we start speaking directly to God. Take a close look at the phrasing of verse 5. You alone we worship, and you alone we ask for help. I want to ask you, do you notice the order of those statements? Just think about that for a second. So the crucial point is that worship comes first, and asking for help comes second. This teaches a really profound kind of humility. Think about an everyday relationship. Imagine a kid who only ever calls their parents when they need money or they're in trouble. We all know that's not much of a real relationship, right? Real relationships are built on love, gratitude, and conversation. By placing worship before the request for help, the text is essentially saying that prayer is about trusting God as the absolute center of your life, not just treating him like an emergency contact when things go wrong. Section 4, Seeking the Straight Path. This covers verse 6, which introduces what is arguably the single most important request in the entire chapter. The verse is beautifully simple. Guide us to the straight path. Notice what's not being asked for here. The believer isn't asking for immense wealth first. They aren't asking for power or success or even health. They are explicitly, specifically asking for directions. And this brilliantly illustrates a vital life principle. Think of a car's GPS. If you don't have directions, driving a really fast sports car is just going to get you completely lost, only a whole lot faster. The same applies to our lives. Without proper guidance, things like high intelligence, abundant money, raw talent, or great power can actually become incredibly dangerous. Right guidance is the prerequisite that helps us use all our other blessings wisely. Both the Quran and the Bible, for instance, in the book of Proverbs, share this powerful image of trusting God to make your path straight. Verse 7 then clarifies exactly what this path looks like. The path of those whom you have blessed, not of those who earned your anger, nor of those who went astray. Ultimately, it's a deep desire to learn from the righteous examples of those who lived with faithfulness and wisdom. It's a plea to avoid spiritual wandering, whether that's deliberately rejecting the truth or just sincerely but misguidedly losing your way. This bears a really striking resemblance to the teachings of Jesus regarding the narrow way that leads to life, as well as the contrast of the two paths found in Psalm 1. If we zoom out for a second and look at the macro structure of Al-Fātiḥah, it's amazing how efficiently it works. In just 7 short verses, it beautifully progresses the believer through 3 distinct emotional and spiritual stages. Step 1 is recognition, remembering God's mercy and justice. Step 2 is relationship, committing to worship and reliance on Him. And step 3 is transformation, humbly asking for guidance to walk a faithful path. Section 5. Shared themes across faiths. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how laying the concepts of the Quran and the Bible side by side reveals substantial common ground. Just look at the alignment here. Both emphasize that God is one. Both stress that God is overwhelmingly merciful and compassionate. Both recognize Him as the creator and sustainer of the world. They share a deep commitment to the power of prayer, the absolute necessity of moral guidance on a straight path, the reality of ultimate justice, and the importance of walking in the footsteps of the faithful. So while the texts certainly differ on specific theological questions, the foundational worldview presented in Al-Fātiḥah has deep, deep resonances across traditions. Jews, Christians, and Muslims all share a belief in a God who is profoundly merciful, highly attentive to prayer, and totally eager to guide us if we just ask. So here's a thought to leave you with. When we look past our theological differences, what can we learn from the paths we share? I really hope this explainer of Al-Fātiḥah has given you a fresh perspective on these ancient words and inspired you to look closer at the deep connections that tie our search for guidance together. Thanks so much for learning with me today.